Before I begin sharing my story, I want to ask you something from the heart. Where did you first hear stories like this? Was it from a friend, from your family, or from someone online who reminded you of your own life? Tell me in the comments, because I truly want to know how people find stories like mine, stories that begin quietly and end in a way you never expect. My story begins on a gray morning, the kind of morning where the house feels too still, the air feels too heavy, and you can sense something is wrong without being told. I remember standing by the kitchen counter, holding a warm cup of coffee, watching steam rise into the cold air. I don't know why, but something inside me whispered, "Today, your life will change." I didn't know how right that whisper would be. Later that afternoon, I picked up my husband's phone from the sofa. He had left it behind in a rush. That wasn't unusual, but the way he kept checking it lately, the way he stepped outside to talk, the way he avoided looking at me when a message came in, I had noticed everything. Quietly, softly, like a woman who learns to read silence more than words. When I unlocked the screen and saw a message pop up, my breath caught. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even a full conversation. Just a few words, enough to make my heart slow down and settle into a strange kind of calm. I didn't cry, not even for a moment. I didn't shake or panic or break down the way people imagine wives do when they discover something painful. Instead, I smiled. A small, steady smile that surprised even me. I knew something was happening behind my back, but I also knew something else, something deeper. Sometimes, life hands you a truth not to destroy you, but to show you who you really are. That night, a quiet idea formed in my mind, not out of revenge, but out of clarity. I realized that if the truth wanted to come out, I would let it, not with yelling, not with fighting, just with a moment that would make him and everyone around us stop and think. So the next morning, when I found a small bottle in his drawer, I didn't say a word. I simply switched it with something that looked almost the same, but wasn't. Nothing dangerous, nothing harmful, just enough to let the truth reveal itself in its own way. I closed the drawer gently, and then I waited. I didn't know then that what happened later that night would make the neighbors knock on our door, that emergency services would get involved, and that the entire street would be whispering about us by morning. But I did know one thing. The truth was finally on its way. I remember the next morning so clearly, even though so much time has passed. I woke up before the sun, long before the house began to stir. I lay there quietly, listening to the soft hum of the ceiling fan, thinking about the message I had seen on his phone the night before. It kept replaying in my mind, not the words, but the silence that followed, the silence inside me, the silence between us. I did not feel anger. I did not feel rage. I felt something deeper, something that comes when a heart begins to understand a painful truth, a truth it did not ask for, but one it must face. I got out of bed slowly, not wanting to wake him. He was sleeping peacefully, as if nothing had changed, as if his world was still steady, as if mine wasn't beginning to tremble. I walked to the kitchen, made myself tea, and sat by the window. The sky was still dark, but the first hints of morning light were starting to climb their way in. I held my cup with both hands, letting the warmth steady me. I whispered to myself, "Just breathe, just breathe." After a few minutes, I walked back to our room. I moved quietly, not because I was afraid of waking him, but because everything in me felt fragile, like one wrong move would shatter me. When I opened his drawer to put away a pair of socks, that was when I saw it. A small bottle, plain, simple, easy to overlook unless you knew what it was. I didn't touch it at first. I just stared at it. A part of me wanted to close the drawer and pretend I never saw it. Another part of me wanted to pour everything out and confront him. But the quietest part of me, the calm part, told me to keep watching. So I did. I picked it up slowly, I turned it in my hand, and then I put it back exactly where it was. I didn't cry. I didn't even sigh. I simply walked away. But something in me changed in that moment. Not out of revenge, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the truth anymore. He woke up about an hour later. He stretched, yawned, and greeted me as if everything was normal. "Morning," he said casually. I smiled. "Good morning." He didn't notice anything. He didn't sense anything. He didn't feel the shift inside me because he wasn't looking for it. He was too busy hiding his own truth. For the rest of the day, I carried that calmness like a shield. I cooked, I cleaned, I worked, I spoke to neighbors, I laughed politely when needed. No one knew what was happening inside my home. No one knew what was happening inside my heart. By evening, I had already made my decision, not about him, but about myself. I decided I wouldn't fall apart. I decided I wouldn't beg or scream. I decided I wouldn't make myself small to be loved. I went into the bedroom later that night, opened the drawer again, and picked up the bottle. I held it for a long moment. Then, very calmly, with steady hands, I made the swap. Something the same size, the same shape, the same color. A simple exchange. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just a quiet choice. When I placed the new bottle back inside, I whispered to myself, "Let the truth reveal itself." I closed the drawer softly and walked away. Hours passed, dinner passed, small conversations passed, and then night settled over the house. As I lay in bed beside him, I stared at the ceiling and listened to his breathing, slow, even, peaceful. Mine was steady too, not because I was fearless, but because I was finally honest with myself, if not with him. I did not know what would happen next. I did not know how loud the night would become, but I knew one thing. The truth always finds its way out, even through closed doors, even through whispered lies, even through silence. And ours was about to begin unraveling. Night had fallen completely. The house was quiet, except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. I could hear his breathing, slow and steady, and I could hear my own heartbeat steadying itself like a drum in the dark. Then it started. A small noise first, like a faint shuffle. I didn't move, didn't even open my eyes. My hands were still resting on the blanket. The noise grew, a little louder. A frustrated grunt followed. "What's happening? Why won't it move?" he shouted suddenly. I stayed silent, though I felt a small flicker of satisfaction inside. not out of malice, but because finally the consequences of his actions were starting to show. The chaos he had created in secret was now right in front of him. The shouting escalated, confusion and panic seeping into his voice. I could hear him knocking things over, the sound of drawers sliding, objects falling to the floor. And then the neighbors. First came a soft knock, then another, louder, more insistent. "Is everything okay? Do you need help?" 5 minutes later, someone was calling emergency services. I could hear the faint buzz of the phone, the low murmurs, and the footsteps in the hallway. I didn't panic. I didn't intervene. I simply sat there, quietly, in the shadows, listening to the scene unfold. The street outside lit up with flashing lights, and I could see the commotion through the window. I remember thinking, all this for a single choice. All this for truth finally catching up. It wasn't fun. It wasn't thrilling. It wasn't about revenge. It was simply life correcting itself. The reality of what had been hidden was now undeniable. Neighbors whispered. Friends came to check. Some laughed nervously. Others shook their heads. And all the while, I sat there, a silent observer. When the paramedics left and the shouting had stopped, a strange calm settled over the house. He looked at me, completely exhausted, disheveled, and utterly shocked. For once, he had no words, no excuses. I didn't need to say anything either. My silence said enough. We went to bed later that night, in the same room, but everything had changed. Not because I had acted dramatically, but because the weight of truth had entered the room. The next morning, life continued, slowly, quietly, normal in appearance, but shifted in essence. He avoided looking directly at me. I avoided asking questions. The air was filled with unspoken understanding. And for the first time in a long while, I felt free. Free from fear, free from deception, free from pretending that everything was okay. I realized something important that night. Sometimes the most powerful actions are the quietest. Sometimes the strongest courage is patience. Sometimes the most profound lessons come not from yelling, but from waiting. I didn't need to explain. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to cry. I only needed to be calm and let the truth do its work. And it did. The days after that night were strange, quiet, heavy, and full of tension. I went about my routine, making breakfast, tidying the house, answering calls from neighbors who had heard the commotion. Everyone seemed curious, but no one asked directly. He moved around the house silently, avoiding eye contact, avoiding any conversation that might reveal his embarrassment or guilt. I noticed him checking the drawer where I had swapped the bottle, a shadow of doubt flickering across his face every time he opened it. I kept my voice soft and warm, as if nothing had happened. Sometimes I would hum while cleaning, letting the melody fill the empty spaces between us. I saw him glance at me a few times, hesitating, caught between fear and relief. One evening, he sat at the kitchen table, staring at his cup of coffee. I could tell he wanted to speak, wanted to explain, but the words were stuck somewhere between his lips and his conscience. I don't know how to fix this," he finally muttered. I looked at him quietly, nodding just enough to acknowledge the truth in his voice. I didn't rush him. I didn't lecture him. I simply let him sit there, feeling the weight of what had happened. The funny thing is, he started to change. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. He stopped leaving little secrets around the house. He began being more careful, more honest in small ways. He started noticing things, how I smiled at him despite everything, how I didn't yell, how I simply let life unfold. It wasn't instant forgiveness. It wasn't a magic fix. But something shifted. The energy between us changed. Suspicion turned into quiet awareness. Resentment softened into cautious respect. I remember a moment that surprised even me. One morning, he placed a single flower on the dining table. A small gesture, but heavy with meaning. No words were exchanged, but I felt a warmth spread in my chest. It was the first time in months that I felt seen. Later we talked, not about the bottle, not about what happened that night, but about life, about choices, about honesty. We didn't solve everything, and we didn't pretend that nothing had happened, but we began the slow process of understanding. I realized that people can change, not because of fear, not because of punishment, but because they see the consequences of their actions clearly. Sometimes, life has a way of teaching lessons that no amount of yelling or arguing can. And I learned something about myself, too. I learned that calmness, patience, and observation are more powerful than anger. That waiting, watching, and letting truth unfold is a strength, not weakness. That sometimes doing nothing is exactly the right thing to do. The neighborhood, once buzzing with whispers, slowly returned to normal. But our home felt different, lighter, more honest, more grounded. He didn't need to shout anymore. I didn't need to worry anymore. The chaos had passed, leaving clarity behind. And in that clarity, I found a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Months passed after that night. Life settled into a rhythm that felt different, but somehow lighter. There were no more surprises, no shouting, no commotion, just quiet mornings, warm evenings, and a home that felt safe again. I noticed small changes in him. He listened more. He asked questions about my day. He remembered little things I mentioned in passing. He no longer hid messages or hurriedly left the room when I came in. He was present, truly present, and it was remarkable how small acts of honesty and awareness could rebuild trust, brick by brick. One afternoon, I caught him looking at me with something I hadn't seen in years. Regret? Perhaps. Relief? Maybe. But also admiration. And that made me smile. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Sometimes actions speak louder than words. I also noticed a shift in myself. I realized that patience had given me strength, that staying calm, observing, and letting life unfold had taught me more about people than confrontation ever could. I learned that I didn't need to control every situation, that sometimes the best choice is simply to stay steady, to hold your ground quietly, and to let truth take its course. There were moments when I thought back to that night, the bottle, the confusion, the chaos. It could have been humiliating, embarrassing, or filled with anger, but it wasn't. It became a turning point, a strange kind of catalyst for change. And it reminded me that even in betrayal or disappointment, there's room for growth, understanding, and unexpected kindness. I look around my home now and feel a calm I hadn't known in years. I see him, and we smile at each other, not with pretense, not with tension, but with a quiet acknowledgement of everything we've been through. And I realize that sometimes the most powerful response isn't revenge, isn't anger, isn't even confrontation. It's patience, presence, and trust in the process of life itself. I want to tell anyone listening to this story, life is unpredictable. People make mistakes. Sometimes they hurt us. But how we respond, how we carry ourselves, how we choose to act can change everything. I chose calm. I chose observation. I chose quiet strength. And in doing so, I found clarity, peace, and even hope. And that is the story I wanted to share. Not because it's perfect or because it ended like a fairy tale, but because it's real. Because it shows that even in moments of betrayal, even in moments that feel overwhelming, there's room for patience, understanding, and unexpected redemption. So if you've ever felt powerless or hurt or unsure what to do, remember this. Sometimes the most extraordinary thing you can do is nothing at all, and simply let life show you the way.